Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and along with me is my co-host, Brother Derek Williams, or as I call my Rafiki or friend. And this is part two of a series of discussions that we were doing that we think is important and relevant today. It's a topic that we know that as people have these issues about race in America, has a visceral response, especially when that topic comes out. Okay, comes out, and they're talking about enslavement, 246 years of this system of what we call America, and the effect that has happened to us right now, even in the 21st century. Now, before I even go on, I want to let those who might be new to the show understand that this is an African-centered talk show, and the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found, and to introduce facts where you find that most people are working on fiction. Most people have an opinion, have some type of way of seeing the world. But we believe that you should study, you should know your topic, because a lot of times people just open their mouth and it shows the type of brain that they have, and that's not a good thing, especially when we are serious about our historical information, because it reflects who we are today. There are positive things that we as a people who are still here, but we want to talk about this topic. It was called, based on the book that we'll put up there, it's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. It seems similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what many of you might have heard. It's the same type of issue of trauma, emotional trauma, and the effect of it, but it's a thing that this doctor, Dr. Joy DeGruy, did a study back in, like a 6-year study, and the book came out in 2006. And she has been going around talking about this phenomenon that affects us as a people of African descent. Now, there's even certain things that we're going to bring up today about things that have come out in the scientific world that verified what she's talking about. We'll talk about that a little later on, but before we go on, I want to talk about this thing called trauma. Let's get a little definition of what trauma is. Okay? Trauma is a psychological disorder or behavioral state resulting from severe mental or emotional stress and physical injury. With emotional trauma, something happens that is so utterly terrifying that normal mental processes breaks down. A traumatic experience can also continue to influence how you see the world, how you react to the things, and how you also react to yourself. There are men and women today, like from the Vietnam War or from what happened with the towers in 9/11, who still have nightmares, still break out in cold sweats and so on and so forth. You know, so and most importantly, there should not be a psychologist or psychiatrist or any student of the mind, counselors or what have you, anywhere on this planet who would deny the negative effect of that kind of trauma. And what we want to say, also, let me give you one more thing about what we talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome or post-traumatic stress disorder. There are certain symptoms that I want you to understand when we talk about what happened to enslaved people, because these are symptoms of PTSD. But 100 years ago, 200 years ago, guess what those enslaved people who were traumatized were suffering from and wasn't recognized? A feeling of foreshortened future, an exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, difficulty falling and staying asleep, hypervigilance. Those things are now being brought to the forefront in studies that had nothing to do with enslavement, but just because it affects all human beings. But what we're focusing on, what happened to our people, okay? What happened? What happened, you know, just because we were so-called freed in 1865, you know, okay, go on and prosper, you know?
Yes.
What do you have to say
Yes,
about that, bro?
I think this approach is in fact necessary. we understand things that we're most familiar with. And so if we can go from the general things that affect all of us, then we sensitize, the issue. And then we look at the specific trauma. And in this case, we're looking at the trauma created through 246 years of enslavement, and then in 100 and odd years with the Jim Crowism and the black codes and the maltreatment as well. And like you said in the last show, this is basically like just yesterday, but you're looking at it over a span of time. If you look at the 911 situation that occurred, and she makes this point in some of her presentations, everybody was, or quite a few people were traumatized by that event. And some people were traumatized who were there, some people who were not there.
Yeah, indirect trauma.
And just told about it was traumatized.
Yeah.
And that was an incident. And so if you look at the conditions of traumatization over 911, and then you apply that to the 246 years and the other following years, you realize that this is not only pathologically insane, but you would not allow someone to see someone murdered or raped or killed, or at least you would understand their malfunctioning behavior with one incident. Now, what if you got up every morning and went to bed every night experiencing the same thing over and over and over? I mean, it's ludicrous to believe that this kind of long-term traumatization can exist and go without seeing dysfunctional behavior 300 years down the road.
And for those who might say, well, that happened 100, 200, 300 years ago. What's that got to do with me in the 21st century? Well, psychologically, there have been studies that are starting to catch up with that reality.
Absolutely.
You know, social learning behavior. Let's use that for example. You're more familiar with that from can you explain what the social...
Well, culture is passed from one generation to another through a shared symbol system. That's language, that's pictures, that's thinking processes. Well, social learning theory basically says, where did you learn to cook from? Well, I learned from my mama.
Yeah, exactly.
And where did your mama learn it from? Well, she learned it from grandma. And where did grandma learn it from? She learned it from mammy.
Exactly,
okay?
exactly.
So social learning theory is the passing of values and perspectives through that shared interaction system from one generation to the next.
Yeah, a child automatically look at those they look up to.
Yes.
And usually their parent or grandparent, and they emulate. I don't know how many times I've seen young mothers be embarrassed when their young daughters start using foul language.
Yes.
And where you get that from? But Mama, you said that, that's that's constantly what we're talking about. Yeah. You don't know that these 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4, they are looking at you and whatever you do. That is social learning. And what we want to say that to look at, when we talk about trauma, and you have a enslaved sister in, say, 1830s, all right? Her daughter was just raped by master, her 9-year-old daughter, right? And then sold. That's traumatic to that mother. You don't think, you think plane going into a building is any less trauma than a mother losing her child that she'll never see again, worried about it, traumatic. Now, that mother is those symptoms of PTSD we were talking about, okay? She's showing symptoms of anger.
Yes.
She's showing symptoms of hypervigilance. Who's going to be next? One of my children?
Yes.
Okay? Yes. We don't call it, those are symptoms. You don't think that mother will be feeling foreshortened future? What the heck should I go on? Yes. Or the outbursts of anger, the difficulty falling and staying asleep, hypervigilance. Yes. Those are PTSD symptoms, but they were in the enslaved households for hundreds of years. And guess what? Going to social learning behavior. She got 2 young boys who are 1, 2 years old, 3 years old, and they're looking at mama.
Yes.
Okay? And they're learning certain behaviors. Why is mama's always sleepy? Why is mama's always angry? Why is mama's always that? Yes. Don't you think that, they love mama?
Yes.
So the social learning behavior is passed on. They ain't got any idea what's going on.
It continues on. I think the examples that you use, Smokey, are superb because we routinely accept what we know, it's almost like it's understood. Okay, we practice what we see practice, and so that idea, that understanding, explains so much of the behavior that we see today in the contemporary sense. You know, when I was growing up, and even now, the quickest way to get into a fight was to call somebody black.
Exactly.
The quickest way was to tell someone that they had nappy hair. You're out in the street fighting about characteristics that are normal for your particular group.
But they use it in a negative way.
But because those things have been pathologized in the process of making you the primitive, less than human, this becomes an integral part of your response mechanism in contemporary life today. And that's what Dr. DeGroy points out. You know, we excuse a lot of the behavior. We want to call it culture, okay? but culture has many components to it. You know, culture has race. Culture has how we think about ourselves. And so we have to go back and ask the question, what was the genesis of a particular behavior?
And that's why we're doing this discussion, because in the black community there's certain cultural behavioral patterns that no longer serve us.
Talk on, Smoke.
100, 200 years ago, they needed to survive.
Yes.
Okay, like you're talking about it, the hair. When you have a young black kid with nappy hair, what we call nappy, even using the term nappy, it came out of that. Look at that nappy hair, boy. But that's an ancient. I could go to the Cairo Museum, which I have done, and in one of the halls, there's a case where they have wigs worn by 4,000, 5,000-year-old wigs. Guess what they look like? Like afros.
Yes.
Okay? So that so-called nappy hair is ancient and is associated with people that all of Europe is still amazed at how they built these pyramids. Okay? Dr. Sheikh Abdul Diab already proved by melanin dosage tests that they look like me and you, because you could count the melanin. You know, those things have been settled. My point is, but those enslaved people were conditioned to believe there was something wrong with that. Yes. And they had the way of communicating in order to survive that world outside the slave row, or their children being sold off, by giving a social, we give it a moral value when we say good here, right? It's not good, bad, it's a moral value. Why do we in our culture roll in this moral value about our hair? What other culture does that?
Well, when you look at the process of enslavement, first of all, you look at distinctions between different groups of people. And if I can line up a number of distinctions, color, hair, body development, prognosticism of the face, and I begin to attribute negative connotations of that, I primitize who you are, then that becomes integrated into our society. When you hear a child today, when a child comes to mom and says, "Mom, I don't like my hair," that statement is so powerful.
I've heard that, yeah.
Because to exist as a human entity and to disregard and think your characteristics are negative, and then to put that into entertainment, put that into movies, put that into songs, where those natural characteristics that you were born, came into the universe with, as being part of the original people, have suddenly become the negativity of the world. There's nothing more traumatic and atrocious than that. And that's why I'm so admirable for the work that Dr. Joy DeGroy did to contemporize so much of that past,
using the same type of symptom that is recognized, that you
and
have.
How we feed it.
With soldiers who just stayed a year in the war zone.
Yes.
And they're having these traumatic types of things.
Absolutely.
Or somebody we accept the fact that somebody got raped. That by at 13 or 14,
they affect them for the rest of their life.
They still have
one
an issue.
Incident.
Yeah. And
imagine repeating that over and over.
And you can't get away from it. And the physiology. This is where this other study that was done in the 1990s by the CDC and another big health system called Kaiser Permanente. In the mid-19, they did, two doctors from both those places did a study with 17,000 individuals, mostly black and brown, okay? And it had a lot to do with the time of when they were pushing that Ritalin on our young black with ADHD kind of stuff. And what they found blew a lot of the pediatric minds, okay? And what they found, they had what they called, that's what they came up with this concept called ACEs, okay, which stands for acute childhood experiences. And they found that what they did, they asked certain, what they would call ACEs questions about trauma in that person's life. They had various different age groups, 17,000. And they found out that, so if you get an ACE point, whatever trauma, that's one ACE point. And the number of more ACE points you got, they found out that there's a correlation between ACEs and health issues of that person. If they're an older person, in 30s or 40s, and they correlated, they grouped all these health issues, and it was like, out of the 17,000, they found that majority, first of all, of Americans, 67% of Americans have, as the children, have ACEs. That's why we're not healthy.
Wow.
And then you talk about heart conditions. You're talking about high blood pressure. You're talking about low immune systems. All these has a direct correlation to childhood trauma.
Wow.
And how you deal with the stresses of that. So
Tremendous.
And so if you have an ACE number, say from 1 to 4, your chances of having heart conditions is elevated, higher the number is. If you have an ACE numbers over 12 of those things, traumatic things you can remember, you're going to have heart conditions that's going to kill you.
And multiple conditions.
And look at what's happening to black people. What about I'm trying to understand, let people understand that when we talk about this trauma of enslavement, even though we, doctors and lawyers, we die of heart conditions. Yeah. Women die of childbirth. An extraordinary amount. And you think that we didn't go through segregation and enslavement, and then when we're talking about social learning behaviors passed down from generation to generation, that's not a fact. And now we know about ACEs. Any pediatrics you could ask about this phenomenon of ACEs if you don't believe us. We don't want you to believe us. Do your research. ACEs is a proof that there is a generational correlation to what's going on. Even affects your DNA.
Yes.
Okay, your DNA is turned on and off. So certain DNAs through time that you don't need in your body or detrimental to your body, if you're under a stressful environment,
it gets turned
right on, early, and it passed on down the generation. So when we're talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome and the 21st century, it is real.
And it has tremendous ramifications. And what I admire about her work, she asked the question, once we're able to identify and to trace so much of this dysfunctional and pathological behavior, you ask the question, well, what is it that we can do? Okay, we can identify 101 different reasons for our medical and psychological conditions, but we have to become vigilant in not only being aware of the connection between what occurred then and now, but to begin to build programs around that information to how do we break the cycle of pathology? How do we break the cycle of violence? And the way we break it is with this kind of knowledge and making sure that programs that we have today addresses these elements. If you identify some significant reasons why something is happening, then you have to counter that by developing programs and action to counter that. And she comes out of a clinical background, and so I'm just so thankful that much of her work today is working with groups of people that have experienced and have expressed behaviors, and then to begin to build medical models and social models in programs, in schools, the family members at the kitchen table, catching yourself from using such derogatory language as nigger, and the nappy hair, and blackie, until we become aware of the source of these and how we are perpetuating this through, like you said, this social learning theory. We are apt to continue to repair, to see it, and to see the same conditions in the street today.
And that's why we're having this discussion, because that's why it's important that we introduce you to this book. Okay, that's what we do here at the Umoja Circle. A lot of our topics are going to be based on books we think that you need to read.
Absolutely.
Okay, and when we are asked, in our day-to-day activities, how do I get started? Well, you got to start somewhere. Okay, we try to introduce you to these topics in a way that makes you say, let me see. Because if you are conceptualizing as we tend to do, because this is a system to say if you don't smell it, taste it, it doesn't exist. And the African ways of thinking is because shamans, or I hate to use the word witch doctor, that's all European terminology, but our medicine that goes back thousands of years, when they talk to an individual, they get the whole person.
That's right.
His family.
The total picture.
Yeah.
Yes.
When in Western, it's this conceptual, and don't they start with a cadaver? so the first time you learn about the body is based on something dead.
Yes.
Instead of something living, because that's all part of it. Yes. And only now the Western science is catching up with where ancient people have been knowing for thousands of years. Yes. Another thing about us is that I have no problem with the 1619 projects and those type of things. We got to start somewhere. But when we say just start from 1619 as people of African descent, and then we go into slavery, we're saying that everything that comes after 1619 is an improvement. Instead of learning that when we came to these shores, we lost thousands of years of knowledge. Yeah. We were disconnected from our history. We were disconnected from our folklore. We were disconnected from our medical treatments of each other. The brilliance of us is that we still have vestiges of those, but we don't know the difference between those things that are helpful, what it means to be an African, and those things that were caused by survival techniques that no longer, benefited. Because if a child today in the 21st century is hearing a mother say that she got good hair, and there's another child that has the regular African, tightly woven, beautiful black hair, how's that going to affect that child? Yes. What is their ACE score going to be when they're 10, 20 years old and looking at the mirror?
I think this is very insightful research, Smokey, that you have shared to the viewers with this ACE theory and examination of conditions that we see and the root of those causes.
The current effect. It is affecting us.
And our presentation or our talk would go undeserved if we didn't look at the impact of those who don't share a common history, but share it from the other perspective. Mm-hmm. People say, well, this is information for African American. No, this is information for us as a nation.
Exactly.
This is not a topic that has been designed specifically for African Americans. It is a topic that has been designed for Americans who continuously deny the impact of the existence and the impact of slavery and Jim Crowism for hundreds of years. And so when we talk to those who can't relate personally with being a slave, you can relate to coming from a segment that were slavers, okay? And so many of the things that people share came out of that existence. When you're driving down the road and you see the rolling hills and you see all the property, and you ask the question, how did they get so rich? They got rich on the backs of people who today you're finding fault and saying they're doing this because of the culture. And if you don't make that understanding link, you're going to see this as an endemic, continuous pathology of America and we're not going to. There will be no evolution. There'll be devolution.
And people, I got another book here. It's called Medical Apartheid. I just kind of threw this in. Okay, it's called a medical apartheid, and it talks about all the experiments that were done on people of African descent since colonial times. Okay, because they wanted to justify the differences. Okay, the kind of gynecological things that were done to black women. Well, and the type of thing, because we could stand the heat and all this nonsense. Then you wonder why that there is a visceral response from black people when it comes to trusted medicine, which has a adverse effect on us not going to doctors. Everything that came out of enslavement, and it get rolled into our cultural fears and language and behavioral patterns, we have to disconnect from some of those things. But we got to talk about it.
We have to talk about it, Smoke.
You cannot love that which is distorted in your mind.
We have to talk about it. And I think one of the things that Dr. DeRoy makes plainly clear, for me at least, is you always have to ask the question, why? Why was a system developed?
Why?
And it was to justify any treatment. If you were mistreating a baby, it was because you were selling those babies. If you justified sexual rape, because you wanted the freedom to be able to rape at will.
You had laws that said that if you raped a black woman, a slave, because she was property,
Yes.
it was not a rape.
But again, in terms of information, I want our audience to know that there is information for America to heal here, okay? And in order for us to heal, we have to understand the origin. That's why it's so ludicrous and hilarious when I see people putting down even the critical race theory that is taught in universities. But to make a prohibition on certain books and people's comfort level. I don't want little Johnny to feel uncomfortable about something that happened 200 or 300 years ago. Imagine the discomfort that we have learned to live with from generation to generation. I mean, the whole rationality of it is irrational.
It's irrational.
And yet, you see it on national television as a normal thing, whether it's Governor DeSantis talking about it or here in Texas, just the wholesale elimination of books that can enlighten you.
Until we deal with that, that's why they want to get rid of stop reading books and stuff like that, because you won't want to face the truth.
Yes.
And any psychiatrist tell you that most of the abnormal behavior is found in secret.
That's right.
That's why you go to doctors but we got to go. Until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.
Thank you, Smoke.